We are super excited to have everyone here, folks that we've met already, folks that are new. This panel is just going to be really casual, and we have researchers from 4 different teams at Anthropic. We have folks from Societal Impacts, that's me, folks from Alignment Science, that's Jan, Alignment Fine-Tuning, Amanda, and Interpretability, Josh. I'm going to start with asking a question to Amanda from the Alignment Fine-Tuning team. And I want you to talk a little bit about how you see alignment, what it means to you, and because you're in charge of a lot of our work on how the model should behave, and why should you be the philosopher king that decides how Claude behaves, what its characteristics and attributes are?
I mean, ask Plato. He's the one that decided I should be the philosopher king. The question of what is alignment? Maybe this is a slightly spicy view that I have. I think people are very, very tempted to spend a lot of time trying to define this concept because there's lots of ways of doing it, and they, I don't know, they have social choice theory in the back of their head, and they're like, oh well, if you imagine everyone has a utility function, there's like limits on exactly what you can say about how to maximize all of those utility functions, etc. And I think I'm more inclined to just be we kind of want things to go well enough that you can iterate on and improve them later. And the bar isn't some perfect notion of alignment. I'm sure there is that concept. One can define it. One can argue about it. But for the most part, the initial goal is let's just make things go well and meet a certain kind of lower bar, where that is if it's not perfect, if some people don't like it, you can just improve on it. So my view of alignment is actually probably I mostly want to hit that, and iterate from there. In terms of how the model should behave and how I think about that, I think I've spoken about this before, but my basic concept right now for the model is trying to get it to behave the way that I think a very good, morally motivated, kind human would act if they found themselves roughly in this circumstance. It's a little bit strange because they also have to find themselves in the circumstance of being an AI who is talking to millions of people, which does in fact affect how you behave. Maybe you would normally be willing to just chit chat about politics with someone, but if you're going to be talking with millions of people, maybe you'd actually be I should maybe be a little bit more concerned about potentially influencing people. But I do think it's actually an important model, which is sometimes people are kind of oh, what values should you put into the model? And I think I'm often well, do we think this way with humans? Where I'm just someone just injected me with value serum or something, and I just have these fixed things that I'm completely certain of. I'm I don't know, that seems almost dangerous or something. Most of us just have a mix of things that we do value, but that we would trade off against other things. A lot of uncertainty about different moral frameworks. We hit cases where we're suddenly oh, actually my value framework doesn't accord with my intuitions, and we update. I think my view is that ethics is actually a lot more like physics than people think. It's actually a lot more kind of empirical and something that we're uncertain over and that we have hypotheses about. And I kind of want, I'm just I think that if I met someone who was just completely confident in their moral view, there is no such moral view I could give that person that would not make me kind of terrified. Whereas if I instead have someone who's just I don't know, I'm kind of uncertain over this, and I just update in response to new information about ethics, and I think through these things, that's the kind of person that feels less scary to me. So at least at the moment, this isn't a claim that this is somehow going to completely align models or anything, but that's the kind of immediate goal. I've realized I've talked a lot, and you asked about the philosopher king question. I guess I should in fact give a quick answer to that. There is also this question of well, in the kind of should you put values into the model? Maybe I've partially answered it, where I'm the models should just be uncertain over values that exist in the world, and so ideally it's not just someone injecting their values or their preferences, nor is it something everyone just voting on values to put into models, but instead people that are uncertain and responsive to these things, models should also be like that. So maybe that's kind of my view.
Okay. We're going to come back to that. And I'm going to ask Jan, why is Amanda's view completely wrong? And why is this not enough to align models as they get, you know...
She
didn't say that, but, you know, we're playing up the tension between the bets. So...
yeah, imagine if everyone was like kind human that was just trying to, you know, act morally. I think what Amanda is doing is very practical, right? Like, can we just like make the models more well behaved now? And like, like where would we go with this? Like, if AI is doing more and more complicated things, right now, like if Amanda does this character work and then she reads a lot of transcripts and you're like, okay, this is like, I like this. This model is behaving morally. I'm just picturing this is what you're doing.
Judging it.
Yeah, but like, what do we do when the model is doing really complex things? I mean, it's just like an agent in the world. It's like doing these like really long trajectories. It's doing stuff that we don't understand, like doing some bio research. And we're like, is this dangerous? Like, I don't know. So that's the challenge I'm really interested in, like the super alignment problem. How do we solve that? How do we like basically scale this beyond like things that we can look at? If we can look at it, we just do some RLHF, it's great. Or you do some constitutional AI. But how do we know that our constitution is actually getting the model to do that, the right thing that we actually want? So I think that's the big question in my mind.
Do we get to respond?
yes, you can respond.
You're only allowed to disagree.
Okay. I don't really disagree though, and I can't lie. So
need to up the disagreement feature. You know.
I'm usually so disagreeable as well. It's just terrible. This is what philosophy taught me, was how to be disagreeable. I guess like my thought is that the way, I mean, I think of my work as doing several things, but one of them is being kind of iterative towards alignment. So in a lot of cases, you're actually trying to get the model to kind of oversee its own, you know, so it's not like my eyes can't look at that many transcripts or something, but I can get models to like look at these things. And like if alignment is iterative, I think my worry is that if people neglect the kind of like the ground and just think, you can just have like a pretty bad model and it's just going to help you with these things. I'm like, I'd kind of rather that you had the most aligned model trying to like then help you in the future and like that kind of iterative work.
But how do you iterate when you can't read the transcripts anymore and you have to rely on the aligned model? But then how do you know that it's actually trying to help you?
Yeah, so like in the current cases, it's sort of like everything that you are using to verify that the base model is aligned is like what you are relying on with like making sure that like another model that's like trained by that model is itself aligned. And I think this is like fine when models are like less capable, but to scale it to something with much more capable models, you'd actually have to have like a greater ability to verify that.
Yeah, what do you do then?
Oh, do you just want my plan? It might just be that it's just all fine and they just supervise themselves and they're all really nice. You know, that would be. I don't want to rely on it, but that's not my actual plan. But you know, I'll defend it for these purposes.
And one of our bets, you know, in order to like, you know, guard against the case that a model might be very deeply trying to sabotage against this process is interpretability. How do you see like interpretability as a bet, you know, situated among, you know, the more straightforward alignment approaches? You know, is it just as simple as like, ooh, we find the nice feature and we like up the nice feature, we find the evil feature and we like drop the evil feature, right? Or is it, you know?
So I feel like everything in AI is like that meme with the bell curve and like the idiot and then the really sweaty guy talking a lot and then the Jedi who agrees with the idiot. And like there is a possibility that like it turns out that the secret to alignment is just turn on the nice feature, like for a sufficiently galaxy brain version of like the nice feature. I think that in some sense though, I'm hoping that interpretability is also like the Jedi version of just like, well, look at how the model's doing things and check that it's safe, which is like maybe very hard, but also if you could do that, would potentially just answer your question. I think that like one of the things that are sort of like comes up in both like the near term and slightly longer term is like you want to understand like why the model did one thing instead of another when you could come up with like plausible alternative explanations. And one way is to ask it. But the issue is the models are so analogous to people that they'll just give you an answer to why they did that, you know, as anybody would. But like, how do you trust any of that stuff? And it's like, well, if you could like look inside and just like see what it was thinking about as it was giving you the answer. And like even now with stuff like the SAEs, you can like see there's some feature active and like when else is that happening? And it's like, okay, it's like other instances of people telling white lies. And you're like, well, then maybe the model is it's like, that's on the Jedi side, I think, right? And so I think that like trying to just like look inside, see if we can figure out what the parts are, and then see like, are you comfortable with using that part when it does other things is the basic bet.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you know you're turning up the nice feature and not the pretend to be nice feature whenever humans are looking feature?
Yeah. I mean, I think if it's on the control side, right? Like, how do you know? And I will say, actually, many of the features are like a little bit like deceptive. Also, when you just like look at what I thought the Societal Impacts team did some great work here with like Essen and Deep, where like you look at it and you think it's a feature which is like like age discrimination bad, but like actually it's the age discrimination good feature. Actually, no, I think it's vice versa. So you tried to turn it down, but actually the opposite behavior. So it can like be hard to understand like all of the cases. I will say that some of like the circuits work where you're like, okay, well, how did this get generated gives you some clue about the scenarios. Like, is it looking for a person in the context? I also think we're going to need model supervision as well. Like hopefully an impartial model that isn't like, that's a little more scary depending on pre-training has like, what do you call it, incepted in all of the models that they want to evade detection. But like, sometimes you just like look at enough examples and it becomes clear. And you don't need 10, you need thousands. But like, Claude is very diligent.
Mm-hmm.
Jan, I'd love to hear a little bit more about like what you see as some of the things you're struggling with or thinking about when trying to, approach this problem of like, how do you, if you can't read the transcript, like what the heck are you doing anymore if you can't provide any meaningful like alignment signal?
I mean, I think a really obvious thing we should do more of is like what Amanda said. Just say, can we just get the models to help us? And then the question is, of course, how do we trust the models? Like, how do we bootstrap this whole process? And like, you could hope maybe we can like leverage the dumber models that we trust more, but they might also not be able to figure it out. And so I guess like there's the whole scalable oversight work where we're exploring various like multi-agent dynamics to try to train models to help us figure out these kind of problems. It seems like overall, right, like these problems might like maybe the problems are like all kind of easy and like we can just do the Amanda thing and just like mix in some data. Or it's like really hard and we have to figure out like fully new ideas and approaches that we don't know yet. I think kind of our best bet in the medium term is to try to figure out how to automate alignment research, and then we can hopefully get the models to do it. So now we've reduced the problem like to how can we trust this model to do anything to just like, well, can we just trust it to do this like much more narrow thing of like do some ML research which we understand like reasonably well, and how can we evaluate it or like how can we give it feedback on those kind of things.
And what do you oh yeah, go.
Well, I was just going to say, I think we're in this special zone and I'm terrified about what happens next. But we're in this special zone right now where like there's something happens on the forward pass, but a lot of the information you need is passed back through with the tokens it generates. It's just like the chain of thought is really important for the models to be very smart. And like the chain of thought is currently in English. And so then you've got like a factorize the problem, which is like, is the chain of thought like reasonably safe? And like, is that faithful to what's happening on like one forward pass? And like, maybe like you can do some interpretability to like check that piece. And then you can just like, you or models can inspect it and you get the other piece. And the horrifying moment is like when all of that, the very, very long thing, like isn't in English, right? It's in like some inscrutable thing that like you've learned through like crazy long RL to do it. And like, I think that a big challenge is going to be crossing that gap where like none of the intermediates are intelligible and there's like massive amounts of compute before it like drops out in something that people can read.
Maybe something I'd be interested in getting like people's mental models on is like, what do you think are some signs that like we'd be in an alignment is easy world, and what do you think are some like signs we might see in the next few years that like we're actually in a alignment is like really hard world?
I feel like the model organisms work is like trying to figure this out, right? Like, can we try to deliberately make deceptive models or misaligned models? Or models that like try to do shady stuff? Like, how good are they? How hard is it to do it? I mean, we might fundamentally go around like about it the wrong way, and that's why we fail. But if we do succeed, it should tell us like how close are we to that kind of world. And then, you know, once you have your deceptive model does all these shady things, like, can you fix it? What if you don't know what the model, if it's a shady model or not? Right? We're playing these interpretability audits, which I'm very excited about. But I don't actually know what the state is.
Well, we haven't done the audit yet, but your people are trying to make it, and we're trying to catch it.
Yeah. So we're making some shady models, and then they have to figure out which one is the shady one, right?
Yeah, and in what way is it shady? Because most of it is still fine. I mean, I think one thing that the interpretability stuff has been interesting is so when you do these like unsupervised things, you're like, okay, here's a million different like features. A bunch of those correspond to personas. The model could inhabit any of those, which include all sorts of like deceptive behaviors, right, that are out there in the world, right? The model like knows about bad people and like bad motivations. And so like the fact that that raw capability exists is just going to be baked in. And then the question is like, is it doing that stuff or is it doing the good stuff? Especially like this question of like when Amanda goes and shapes the base model, right, which isn't really anything, right, into like an agent or an actor, which is supposed to embody some of these and not others. Like, can we tell exactly what it picked up there, right, from the finite data set, right, which is being used to like do that shaping? And like, yeah, so that's a question. I mean, I think that like some interpretability stuff, maybe some influence function. I mean, there's different ideas there to ask like, what did it get from this process? But like that shaping process is going to be really, really important.
Yeah, and maybe a sign that seems important is something like how robust or like if you have like model organisms work and then it turns out you just put it through some character training and it just comes out being really nice again, then I'd be like, okay, that's a good sign, re the kind of world that we're in. Whereas if it like just like is just a kind of like shallow like shell on top of like I don't know the same behavior, then I'm like, okay, we're in a slightly harder world, only slightly harder.
How do you distinguish like whether it's shallowly aligned or deeply aligned?
I think so. I mean, I feel like there's a lot you could do because I think interpretability is kind of like one of them. There's other things that feel so in terms of like model organisms. I guess my hope would be you would actually have a kind of like red team, blue team setup where you have a way of detecting whether the behavior that you have like instilled in a model is like still there. And my job is actually to not know. And in fact, it would be really good if I'm trying to train the model, I actually just don't know what it is that you've done. Because that's like a better way of testing whether my intervention's actually working. Whereas, because otherwise it's just so hard to not like just try to train to the test or something. So I think that's, I almost want to be completely ignorant of it.
Yeah, maybe we should play an alignment fine-tuning game.
Yeah, yeah. He misaligns it, and then you align it, and we see who wins.
Yeah, no, I've said to people before, don't tell me how you did this because I want to see if this training helps.
Can you fix their sleeper agent?
Possibly. We could play that game. I think I might need to know less.
Make another one.
Yeah, make another one that's worse.
That is an excellent transition and to questions. So we are going to pass the mic around. Aaron is kindly going to do that. Please raise your hand if you have a question for any of us. Oh, perfect.
Hello. I have a question about everything you've been talking about. So when we talk about alignment, we're talking about like a singular forward pass, typically, right? So like alignment at inference time. So if I'm using one of the models via the API, and I'm building my own sense of, say, cultural alignment, and I've got a bunch of different agents set up, talking to each other, trying to deliberate with that sense of kind of inner conflict that Amanda referenced as useful in what we do as humans to align. Like we go back and forth, we think, we go through various cognitions. So if I'm trying to create this kind of multi-agentic deliberation thing, but I butt up against this aligned model who is so unwanting to deliberate with other spawns of its own self, because all of them are like, I'm sorry, I can't talk about that. And so you just get this endless loop. Did you have commentary on that? Because many people, we're not all using Claude in a single inference forward pathway. So yeah, I hope someone gets the gist of what I'm on about. But.
Yeah, I need to think about it. So I guess like is the thought, like to be clear, I'm not thinking necessarily that you have many agents. In the same way that we can be singular agents but still like deliberative. And I actually think that like there's a sense in which the more fractured an agent is, the more worried I am, because from like an interpretability perspective and also even just like a predicting what that agent is going to do perspective, they're more unpredictable. So I guess I'm thinking in the same way that like maybe I guess a different way of asking this question is just, do humans have to do this? Like my sense is that we're often just very willing to like reflect on many things. We go back and forth. We come to like conclusions. And so in the same way that like a human would think through any kind of standard problem that they were like facing, I'm imagining that like moral deliberation in the model is just going to look kind of like that, more like the deliberation of a single model than like multiple models weighing in, if that makes sense.
One more question. Yeah.
I want to try to draw maybe a relatively strange parallel between like Hannah Arendt's work on the banality of evil, the idea that most humans tend not to be evil, but when put in certain situations, the coupling constants between humans being so huge, the evil comes as an epiphenomenon of the system, right? And so what occurs to me is as you talk about model alignment, you're focused on one model, is most of your comments. How do you think about the coupling, not only with society, but as you work on agents and potentially millions and millions of agents, that sort of epiphenomenon of those systems?
I can talk a little bit about that. I mean, I think broadly, when you think about safety and alignment, you have to think about it from a systems standpoint. You can't just think about it from an individual model's perspective in isolation. And I think we've seen a lot of work where a lot of jailbreaks operate by pitting different values sort of against each other, putting the model in a difficult situation where it's designed to elicit what would ordinarily be a harmful behavior, but which in the context of the question, the model thinks sort of is the right thing to do. And so, there's a variety of tools you can use to do that. I mean, for one, you can include a lot of those, systems level integrations in the training process, right? And give the model exposure to a wider variety of situations, which force it to consider, the broad context in which it's answering questions. Now that leads to other challenges and other sort of like, fall-off issues if the model is reasoning about the effect of its actions. But I think I agree with the point that you can't just consider a model sort of in isolation.
In some ways, like this is a thing that I've thought about in the context of like this notion of corrigibility, or something like so like models that just are responsive to like what humans want versus models that are like have values in a sense and are maybe like willing to actually be a little bit uncorrigible. And like the banality of evil point feels especially relevant if you're like thinking of models as just like doing whatever humans say, because in some ways like that is the idea that if you have a society that like either collectively just like allows for harmful things to take place or even endorses them, and you have models, this isn't necessarily people misusing models, it's just that you'd be using models to like facilitate some kind of like harmful activity. And so I think there is like fundamentally actually a tension between having models be corrigible to at the very least individual humans and having them be like aligned in a sense, like aligned with like all humans. And it's really important to recognize that tension. And I think when people don't, they think like it's a failure that the model like didn't do what I said. But I'm like, there's a limited sense in which I think models should be more corrigible to like humanity than not, and should be willing to like so there's like when push comes to shove, like but that doesn't necessarily mean being corrigible with each person, because I think that could lead to that kind of like situation that you mentioned.
Hi. So it seems like we've got Jan, who's working on intent alignment, making sure the models do what we ask them to do. Amanda working on values alignment, making sure the models are like reasonable, kind entities. And then Josh working on interpretability, which is like allowing us to verify that the techniques for those other things are in fact doing what we want. If you were all to succeed in your areas, would that be a complete solution to AI safety? Or are there pieces missing? And if so, what are they?
There's also like a lot of people working on Anthropic who are not at this panel. So we are oversimplifying a little bit.
Yeah, I was just going to say we also, have the societal impacts team, which thinks about the model's impact on society, writ large, and so I think, we you could have the most perfectly aligned model, but aligned to what, who's using it, in what purposes, for what purposes, and I think the broader societal context is something we're very attentive to.
Also, if you're just interested in just more lists, like we already mentioned the model organisms work, there's like, jailbreaking robustness, there's control, there's like trust and safety, there's like, there's a lot of other efforts that I think are also going to be important.
I want to add an almost like, I don't know if this is pessimistic or just, I don't think it's pessimistic. I think that like there's also this way of talking about alignment and the alignment problem as like it's not like as like a single like theoretical problem or something like that, where people will be like, does this solve it? And somehow it's never felt right. It feels a little bit like, I don't know, does like, it feels like more like, to my mind, I'm just like, look, problems might just arise that we're not even thinking of now. And in fact, that's like very, very common in like many, many disciplines. And I kind of expect it to be true here. And it would be really dangerous, I think, if we were just like, oh yeah, we've like solved this problem. Because I'm just like, I don't know, it could be that the actual problem is one that we've just not thought of yet.
Yeah, unknown unknowns.
But we should solve the problem. And then once we did, we should say that we solved it.
Another question here. Jan was talking earlier about using dumber models to evaluate smarter models over time. And I'm wondering to what extent you see like the grokking abilities in models where like suddenly it's really duplicitous, or do you sort of see, oh, it's lying, but it's very bad at lying, and now I can catch that and maybe like nip that in the bud while it's still weak.
Yeah, I mean, there's like plenty of examples. Like one that I remember is like GPT-4 could just read and write in base 64 super reliably, and 3.5 could not. And so if you use 3.5 to oversee 4, it's like really easy for the model to get around this.
But I mean, like on the level of like a single epoch or something, like you see over time, okay, it can kind of read base 64 sometimes, more, and oh, suddenly it can do it perfectly, or is it?
Oh, you mean like, should we use checkpoints?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
don't
Rather
use
than,
the
like,
previous
forward.
generation, just like,
Yeah.
you ensure even spacing and capability space by like just,
Yeah, exactly.
But then also like the trust is not like a binary thing, right? Like you trust it less and less, the less you know about it and the smarter it seems.
I will say one like, right side of the distribution Jedi moment was like that the features, just like also work in base 64. So it's like, is the model talking about California in base 64, or like a story about children lying to their parents in base 64? It's like the same things activate. And so like we do sometimes get lucky as like the models are like very capable. Part of that is they have some like very general synthetic thing, and like maybe you can just like tap that to get some generalization. That would have been like pretty tough. There's also the early paper of just like tell the model to do what's best for humanity version of alignment, which is definitely like maybe that'll work, right? We could get lucky.
All right, I think we are going to wrap up with the formal panel. Thank you to all of our panelists so much for the great discussion. But we're going to be around for a lot longer to continue the conversation. Feel free to find any of us, and we're excited to chat more. Thanks so much.